Makita niyo na yung shared screen. Can you see it now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
So, as I've said earlier, although we already are through with your first part, which is your first for your topics for your first prelim, still we are going to continue with the topics for your midterms. Okay? Kasi nga, batching tayo, so we have to finish our syllabus right on schedule before the second batch comes in. Okay? Please put off your microphone para magkarinigan tayo ha. But later on, we'll have some time for questions so you can put on your microphone. Okay? So we have here just to refresh you of the course outcomes. You are to identify and sketch graphs in space, lines, planes, cylindrical surfaces, as well as surfaces of revolution and quadric surfaces. That's for your first prelim. Dapat ma-master niyo yan. No? For your midterm, we will have to come up with the following course outcomes. Find partial derivatives and directional derivatives of functions of several variables. We need to solve to solve problems involving total differential, find relative and absolute extrema of functions of several variables, and then apply Lagrange multiplier method on constraint optimization problems. Sa final term na to, no? Sketch graphs of equations in polar coordinates, and you should learn how to evaluate double and triple integrals using our rectangular coordinates, polar coordinates, cylindrical coordinates, and spherical coordinates. So those are the course outcomes. So recall the following topics for the first prelim. Again, I put an emphasis of this kasi ito yung exam ninyo for March 5. No? For the midterm topics, this is what we're going to discuss. Your vector valid function. Of course, you need the introduction to vector valid function. The curves in the plane using vector valid functions are optional. Curves in space using vector valid function. You have your calculus for vector valid function. Meaning to say we have to discuss limits, continuity, derivatives, and some integrals of vector valid function. Arc length and curvature. We need our parameterization using your arc length, which is again an optional topic. Differential calculus for functions of variables will include the intro of functions of several variables, partial derivative, your higher order, your total differential, chain rule, of course, implicit differentiation, total derivatives and related rates, directional, the tangent planes, two-level surfaces, and your relative extrema, and the method of Lagrange multiplier. Medyo mahaba yung midterm. I'm going to divide it into 3 parts later on. So we're going to discuss the first part. And then, for the finals, included na rin dito nakasulat. So you can just take a look at this one later on. Okay? When we go to our final topic. So let's start our midterm topic with the definition of your vector valid function. It is supposed to be a function of this form. R of t equals f of ti plus g of tj, or if in case it's a 3D, then you have your f of ti plus g of tj plus h of tk. So this is a vector valued function such that the components of here, f, g, and h are real valid functions of this parameter t. So you can also write them in this form, that is, you have here f of t, g of t. So, di ba vector ito na notation? You can write it in that manner. And you have an arrow there on top. Or kung three valued, 3 components, you have f of t, comma, g of t, h of t. This vector. Then we have the following remarks. The first one is about the first form of the function that defines a two-dimensional vector value function in the plane. The second form actually describes your three-dimensional vector valued function in a space. Yung kanina, yung first form, yung dalawa lang, no? Two-dimensional vector, whereas yung tatlo, yung second form, is your three-dimensional vector valued function. Now, we make use of t as a parameter because it can actually represent your time. So, when you say parameter t, it actually may lie between two real numbers, a and b, or its value may range over the entire set of real numbers. So, it depends upon your problem. So, let's take a look at this example. Say, it says that writing a vector valued function for a given circle, ellipse, or hyperbola. So you're asked now to write a vector valued function that traces out each of the following implicit curves. So we already learned about your quadratic surfaces, but this time we have actually the simple ellipse curve. No, its equation can be rewritten as x squared over 16 plus y squared over 9 is equal to 1. So there are three here that we have to write down its vector valued function. Let us try to work on the first equation. This is the ellipse. You're asked to write a vector valued function that traces out our ellipse. So for the solution, we come up with the following. You have to rewrite the implicit equation so that it shows a sum of quantities squared equals 1. So a sum of quantities squared equals 1, meaning to say this one is rewritten as instead of simply x squared over 16, when you square kasi ang 4, you come up with 16, right? So you rewrite it as x over 4 squared plus y over 3 squared because the square of 3 is actually 9. So that's equal to 1. So simply rewrite this implicit equation. A sum of quantities squared equals 1. And then we have to make use of the following identity. You are familiar with this from your trigonometry, right? Cosine squared t plus sine squared t is equal to 1. This is actually an equation which is discussed not only in your trigonometry but also discussed in calculus 1. Okay? So cosine squared t plus sine squared t is equal to 1. When we equate the parts being squared, then we can now consider your x over 4 because equal daw siya sa 1, no? So ang cosine squared t is actually your this x over 4 squared. So ang cosine t is now equal to x over 4 and this is y over 3. So sine squared t, so I mean to say your sine of t is equal to y over 3. Is that clear? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Sige. So, ito yung, kaya ang reason na nire-write natin siya, ang equation in terms of 1 and in terms of this manner is because we have to make use of this equation as a reference. So,
Ma'am,
now we just need,
sa ellipse
yes?
lang po yan, no?
Yes, sa ellipse pa lang.
Sa ibang, ano po, yung like parabola.
We will take a look at the next equation later on. Okay? So this is the first example here. So you have x over 4 equals cosine t and y over 3 is equal to sine t. So meaning to say, because we have this, we can now solve x equals, diba, rewrite natin, x equals, we can multiply both sides by 4. So we will now have x equals 4 cosine t and y equals 3 sine t, which is this. Is that okay? Nasundan ito from year to year? Hello? Okay, sige. So, we can now write a vector valid function that traces up the ellipse in this manner, which is r of t equals, this is your x, 4 cosine t I, this is your y, 3 sine t j. So, we now have r of t to be equal to 4 sine of ti plus 3, it's the same, no? Cosine of tj. Since you could have chosen to switch the sine t and cosine t above, pwede rin siya i-rewrite in this manner, no? 4 sine of ti, okay, plus 3 cosine of tj. Now, yung question kanina, how about if another equation? Okay? Let's take a look at this. Yung pangalawa kanina, di ba? Let's check the question. Balikan natin. The other one is here. Okay. How about the circle? Kasi baka nising, how about the hyperbola? Let's take a look on the circle. You're asked to write a vector valid function that traces out the circle. So you have x squared plus y squared is equal to 4. So let's take a look at the solution of B. Yung question kanina about pag-iba. So, pag B, okay, tracing out a circle is actually straightforward. So, because you can, the process show diba, although it still may be helpful at vectors on the unit circle, can be represented this form. V now is equal to cosine of theta I plus sine theta j. So the vector valid function r of t is now equal to, diretso na, cosine of ti plus sine of tjy. Because your equation, x squared plus y squared is equal to 1. If you remember, di ba, ang cosine squared plus sine squared, remember yung kanina? Cosine squared plus sine squared is equal to 1. So, kung cosine squared, x squared man ito, plus sine squared, diba, is equal to 1, then you simply have this. Okay? So, to obtain a circle of radius 2 centered at the origin, which is of this graph, x squared plus y squared equal to 4, we just need to multiply through this vector valid function, okay, by a scalar factor of 2. So, since ang nahanap natin kanina, balik natin yung kanina, ha, para makita ninyo. Dapat kasi sinulat ko na lang, pero baka mamaya kasi pag isulat ko. Okay, here. Let me just go back to that one first so that you would understand. X squared plus y squared equals 4. Ngayon, ang x squared plus y squared natin equals 1 lang man. So, kailangan natin ng anong factor para maging ganito. Okay? Kasi ang ano natin is cosine squared plus sine squared is equal to 1. So, but the equation that you're asked, write a vector valid function that traces this curve will now be, okay, what do? We have to consider the following. That is, we have to introduce the value 2. What we did here. To obtain a circle of radius 2 centered at the origin, which is the graph of that one, we just need to multiply through this vector valid function by a scalar factor of 2. So, you now have 2 cosine ti plus 2 sine. Naintindihan na yung difference ng ano? Kasi yung question kanina, kung sa ellipse lang ba yon? And then, yes, I said, iba naman ulit pag ellipse, iba din pag hyperbola. Is that okay? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Sige. Tingnan natin yung hyperbola, ha? So, yung sa hyperbola naman, isa kasi yung letter C. There is a note here that it will trace out the same circle but with the opposite direction. Kasi ito, 2 sine ti plus cosine tj. Ito is 2 cosine ti plus 2 sine tj. Pareha pa rin siya. So, mag-trace out lang siya ng different direction. Okay, ito na. To trace out a hyperbola of this form, notice na minus. So, x squared over a squared minus y squared over b squared is equal to 1. Remember, ang ginamit nating equation kanina is yung x squared plus y squared is equal to 1. But, I do not know if you discuss it in Calculus 1, but sa Calculus 1 ko, diniscuss ko pa rin kasi yun, although it's a topic in Trigo. Although it's a topic in trigonometry, I discussed also yung pag-derive ng cosine squared plus sine squared t equals 1. When you divide both sides of the equation by cosine squared t, what do we have? This becomes 1. So sine squared t over cosine squared t, it becomes tangent squared t. And 1 over cosine squared t, it becomes secant squared t. I required my students to memorize the following formula. Ito. And then after that, ni-require ko yung basic ng mga formulas na i-memorize. For example, ang sine at saka cosine, sine over cosine, you know that that should be tangent. Ang 1 over cosine is supposed to be secant. So if we have 1 over cosine squared t, that becomes secant squared t. If at this point hindi nyo pa memorize, then there is a topic in my calculus 1. You can take a look at that one and review back how I gave the mnemonic device to memorize these mga formulas kung hindi nyo pa memorize. No? Because you will be needing them until the end of the semester uli. Okay? Kasi mabalik-balik lang ni ng mga equation. So kung hindi pa ninyo master ito, then you have to find a way na ma-master itong mga. Kasi pag exam, hindi po, walang kodigo kasi pag exam. I do not know kung nasanay kayo mag-kodigo, pero as much as possible. During the exam kasi, closed notes, ha? Baka yung iba nasanay pa rin na mag-open notes. Do you have a board exam? May board exam ba kayo? Wala. After you graduate.
Naam,
Meron,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Okay. So as early as now, kung may mga board exam kayo, kasi hindi open notes, hindi open formulas ang board exam, you try to familiarize yourselves with the formulas already when you are solving. Kasi it will be too late na tsaka pa kayo mag-memorize yung review time na ninyo sa exam, di ba? So kung ngayon pa lang, alam niyo na mag-solve, memorize na ninyo, practice na, pagdating ng board exam, it will just be a matter of recalling all of these formulas. Okay? Sige. As I've said, kung hindi pa, tinuruan ko kasi mga estudyante para mag-memorize yan. 1 over cosine squared t, you associate it with is, pag 1 over sine squared t, it's cosecant squared t. Ang sine squared t over cosine squared t is tangent squared t. Ang cosine squared t over sine squared t is your cotangent squared t. So, ito ang pinaka-basic kasi pwede mong i-divide both sides of the equation and come up with itong equation na to. After that, ma-rewrite naman ulit itong equation na to that can be rewritten as ilipat ninyo itong tangent dito. So, meron ka namang equation uli na secant squared t minus tangent squared t is equal to 1. So, you will have again this. This is what you need, the identity that you need. Secant squared t minus tangent squared t is equal to 1. Actually, pwede nyo i-memorize din ito, pero mas madali lang naman mag-derive kung alam niyo yung mga basic, na? Okay? So from here, what do we have now? When you're able to rewrite that, then we now need, you have this identity. So the equation of the hyperbola will now become x squared over 25, diba? So mean to say, secant mo, ang x over 5, that becomes your secant. Diba? X over 5 equals secant kasi squared man yan. Then minus, that's tangent squared. So y over 16 man yan. So y over 4, that becomes your tangent of t. Nasundan? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. So let's take a look at the following. Solving for x and y, we now have, diba, cross multiply ulit. Or if you're not comfortable with cross multiplication, you can divide. Multiply, divide. You can, this one, cross multiply. You can multiply both sides by 5. Okay, you can do that and come up with the following now. This one, x equals 5 secant t and y equals 4 tangent t. So from here, the vector valued function now, this one, write this as 5 secant ti, your x, na, plus 4 tangent tj. Okay? So, plus na yun dito. Plus of this. Y is equal to 4 tan, positive man. Plus ang x kay positive pa rin. So, this is your exercise. Represent the following equations in R squared by a vector valued function. Okay. When we have functions of several variables, what we'd like to do in this section is to go over some of the basic ideas about functions of more than one variable. So you have a function of two variables, z is equal to f of xy. They are actually surfaces in three-dimensional space. So for example, here the graph of z equals to x squared plus 2y squared minus 4 is this. This is actually an elliptic paraboloid. An elliptic paraboloid is an example of a quadric surface which was discussed earlier sa para sa first topic niya. The For the equation of a plane, you have this equation. So, ax plus by plus cz equals c. So, pag makita pa lang niyo itong mga to, dapat ma-recognize niyo na, equation yan ng planes. During exam, So, ma-recognize niyo na. Ma-recognize in the same manner na dapat pag may equation sa ng quadratic surface, I ask you to familiarize yourselves with the formulas of the quadratic surfaces. Para pag nakita niyo yung equation, ma-identify niyo na kung anong klaseng quadratic surface siya. So this gives f of xy equals ax plus by plus t. That is, if we try to solve for z, we can rewrite it in this form. Now, to graph a plane, we will generally find the intersection of points with the three axes and then graph the triangle that connects those 3 points. This triangle will be a portion of the plane and will give us a fairly decent idea on what the plane itself should look like. I ask you to watch the video clip on how to sketch a plane, but let us just try to review that back. In this manner, let me see. Nandito ba dito? For example, here. For the purposes of graphing 12 minus x minus 4y, we can rewrite this as follows. That is, this is a function in terms of xy. And let us call this a function in terms of xy to be your z. So you have z equals 12 minus 3x minus 4y, or you can write it as 3x, para maging, you will have your xyz on one side. 3x plus 4y plus z is equal to 12. As I've said, pag nakita ninyo itong ganito na equation, dapat ma-recognize ninyo na sa 3D, that is actually a plane. Okay? Now, each of the intersection points with the 3 main coordinate axes is defined by the fact that 2 of the coordinates are 0. So, what are we going to do? We're going to yung mga special points, na? So, on the x-axis, we let your y and z to be equal to 0. So, when this is, wait na lang natin para makita. Here, when y and z equal to 0, you will have 3x plus 4y, which is 0. So 4 times 0 plus your z is also 0 plus 0 is equal to 12. So masolve niyo yung value ng x. You will have, and then you have x is equal to 12. So x now is equal to 12 divided by 3, 4. So ito. So the other point would be when ang y na po ninyo ang isolve. You will have x will be 0, z is 0, so you will have 4y equals 12. Therefore, y is equal to 3. And on the z-axis, ang x na po dugang y ang 0, so you will have z is equal to 12. This. And how do we sketch those points? Sa x-axis, you will have 4, 0, 0. So, it is your x-axis. Ayan, x yan. So, 4, then y is 0. So, ito yan point. And then, at y-axis, you have 0, 3, 0. So, 3 ang sa 0 ang sa x, 3 ang sa y, 0 ang sa z. So, this point. And the other one is, at z-axis, you will have x is 0, y is 0, and z is 12. So, ito yung point. So, this is actually. So, kung nagawa niyo na yung assignment ninyo, dapat alam niyo na ganito mag-sketch ng plane sa x, y, and z axis. Okay? So, kinat off lang yan para makita lang yung itsura ng plane ninyo. Is that clear? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Dapat alam niyo na yan ha, kasi yan yung assignment ninyo. So, let's take a look at this one. Next, we want to talk about the domains of functions of more than one variable. So we have the following domain of functions of a singular variable, that is y is equal to f of x. It says consisted of all the values of x that we could plug into the function. So kung ano yung pwede na value, yun yung inyong domain, kung ano yung pwede na value ng x, that will make your y defined. So this means that the domain of a function of a single variable is actually an interval or intervals of values from the number line of or one-dimensional space. For the domain of functions of two variables, they should be regions. So yung isa, one-dimensional space lang, no? Or line, number line. Pero sa domain of functions of two variables, we are talking about the regions from two-dimensional space, and it should consist all the coordinate pairs xy that you could actually plug into the function to be able to get a real number. So dapat yung value ng xy, when you substitute it to the function, your z should be well-defined. Otherwise, hindi yun siya domain. So let's have the following example. Determine the domain of each of the following. So, pag sinabi mong domain, tapos nandito siya sa loob ng square root, ano ang pwedeng value na x plus y? Hello? Pwede ba mag-negative ang x plus y?
No, ma'am.
No,
No.
yes, no. Kasi maging undefined siya. Pwede lang makuha ng square root in terms of real numbers is your positive value, including 0. So, x plus y should be greater than or equal to 0. Tingnan natin yung dito. Yung solution. Okay. Ito. Determine the domain of each of the following. So, for A, dapat ang x plus y should be greater than or equal to 0. So, when you sketch this region, ito siya. X plus y, ito man yung line na x plus y. So, x plus y should be greater than or equal to 0. Next, how about this? Ano dapat? Dapat ano? Pareho lang ba? X plus y pa rin? Hindi. Ano dapat?
Dapat positive yung x at y.
How do you rewrite it? Correct yung positive. Positive at saka ng positive and 0 pwede. Positive and 0.
X and y should be greater than or equal to 0.
Oh, yes. Okay, good. X is greater than or equal to 0 and y is greater than or equal to 0. So, and they really do need to be separate. Dapat separate. Dili pwedeng plus, no? Okay, separate man siya diri. Kanila i-consider x greater than or equal to 0 and y greater than or equal to 0. So, the sketch of this region is this one. X greater than or equal to 0, so kaninga part, and y is greater than or equal to nga upper part. So, this region already. Correct. Then, let's go to the other one. About this. Change ko na lang. So in this final part, we know that we can take the logarithm of a negative number or 0. So dili pwede ang 0, that's why it's greater than 0. Kaya wala man ln ang 0, undefined, di ba? O wala po ln ang negative number. So dapat 9 minus x squared minus 9y squared should be greater than 0. Exclusively dapat greater than 0. So you can solve that as x squared over 9. Kasi when you divide ang starting by 9 plus y squared is less than 1. Okay? So, kani ang region. This is the region. You are asked to determine the domain of the following function. Yan, paano yan? So, consider niyo, dalawa na. Aside from the fact na dapat greater than 0 siya, dapat not equal to 0 pa rin siya kaya magiging 1 over 0 man. So although pwede siya na ang value nyo sa loob niya is greater than or equal to 0, but because it belongs to the denominator, then you should consider greater than 0 na lang. Nakuha? Naintindihan bakit walang equal 0 dito sa baba?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, kasi hindi pwede mag-0 ang denominator niya. How about your level curves or contour curves? The level curves of the function z equals f of xy are two-dimensional curves, and we get it by setting z is equal to k, where k is any number. So the equation of the level curves are of this form, f of xy equal to k. Note that sometimes the equation will be in the form f of xyz equal to 0, and in these cases, the equations of the level curves are this one. Pag sinabi mong level curve, ganito yung tsura niya. Para bang yung flat portion, kung tingnan nyo sa from the upper portion, nag-level up siya, bali, parang plain lang siya, no? Kasi level curve. So let us take a look at this para mas maintindihan ninyo. Identify the level curves of f of xy equals x squared plus y squared. And then you are asked to sketch a few of them. So for the solution, you have to identify what this surface given by f of xy is. So you can rewrite this as such. Anong ma-associate ninyo dito? Anong surface? Ito, cone, di ba? Kasi pag ilipat niyo dito, minus z that is equal to 0. Okay? So you can have, or pwede square niyo yung dalawa. Z squared equals x squared plus y squared. Diba? So z squared equals x squared plus y squared. Pero pag lipat niyo ng dito, you will have 0 equals x squared plus y squared minus z squared. So we actually have a cone. Pag hindi pa ninyo ma-identify kaagad, i-review ulit yung inyong quadric surfaces ha. Kasi malapit na yung exam. Anyway, you still have time to review it back. So the level curves or contour curves for this surface are given by the following. That is, x squared plus y squared is equal to k squared. If we substitute z is equal to k, try to substitute z is equal to k here. Para makita, di ba sabi ko sa inyo, flat, balitin na nyo on top. So yung z ninyo is say a certain value k lang. So tingnan yung plane at z is equal to k. You will have x squared plus y squared is equal to k squared. Para mas lalong maintindihan, so k is a number. So the level curves are circles of radius k with the center of the origin. Tingnan natin yung sketch para parang ganito. So you can either graph them on the surface itself or you can graph them in a two-dimensional axis system. So ito yung graph niya. So ito siya at k equals 1, hanggang dito lang yung cone ninyo. At k equals 2, nandito yung cone. K equals 3, di ba? Kanina, alam naman natin na cone yun siya. K equals 5, ganyan. Or pwede na kung tingnan yung level curves nyo, kung nasa top portion lang kayo magtingin, ganito yung itsura niya. Concentric circles lang ang makita ninyo. Yes, ito. K equals 1 yan. K equals 2 yan. Na-picture out niya, yung sa top portion kayo, parang yung kung drone ang gamitin nyo, parang drone. Drone ba? Ganito. Diba may mga different perspectives pa kayo sa pag-sketch. So, ganito yung tsura sa nasa top portion. So, we can think of contours in terms of the intersection of the surface is given by the function z is equal to f of xy and the plane z is equal to k. This contour will represent the intersection of the surface and the plane. Na-picture out na ninyo? Hello, guys.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yung kanina, di ba? Ulitin natin para makita nyo. Yung side man yung nakita natin kanina, di ba? Ito. So, kung from the top kayo magtingin, ito yung yung mga concentric circles na yan. Okay, so let us have an example. You're asked to sketch the traces of f of xy equals 10 minus 4x squared minus y squared for the plane x equal to 1 and y equals 2. Ang gagawin natin, we have, start with x equal to 1. So with x equal to 1, you will have z is equal to yung x done, substitute by 1. Y, so we will have equals 10 minus, okay, 10 minus 4 times 1 minus y squared. So the equation that you will get will be z equals 10 minus 4, so that will be 6 minus y squared. So this will be graph in the plane given by x equal to 1. Ito. X equal to 3 naman yan. So ang 1 is somewhere. 2 ito. So somewhere 1 dito. Okay? So the graph on the left is a graph showing the intersection of the surface and the plane given by x equal to 1. On the right is a graph of the surface and the trace that actually is shown there. For y equals 2, we'll have this again. Pero hindi na, ano lang to, para lang ma-picture out lang ninyo, na? Ang mga traces. Pero dahil natapos naman natin ang quadratic surfaces, hindi na masyado mahirap i-picture out. A vector function is a function that takes one or more variable and returns a vector. Na-discuss na natin ito before. Okay? But it's just a review of this one. The domain of a vector function is the set of all these for which all the component functions are defined. Let us take the following example. Determine the domain of the following function. So if we talk about the domain now, and you're given r of t, cosine t, ang components niya are cosine t, ln of 4 minus t, square root of t plus 1. So the first component is defined for all t's. The second component is only defined for, kasi di ba kailangan ng ln greater than 0, tapos dili siya negative, no? Greater than 0 man. So dapat t here should be less than 4 because when t is greater than 4, what will happen? Maging negative value na ito. Kung mas maglaki pa siya sa 4, for example, negative 4.1, magiging na siya negative 0.1. LM negative 0.1 does not exist anymore. Okay? The third component is only defined for t greater than or equal to negative 1. Kasi dapat t plus 1 is greater than or equal to 0. Or that should be t is greater than or equal to negative 1. So putting all of this together gives the following domain. So kunin yung mga values that will satisfy all of this, t less than 4, t greater than or equal to negative 1. Okay, so you now have to come up with the following. This is the largest possible interval for which the three components are different. So meaning to say, pag naghanap kayo ng domain ng function, dapat masatisfy niya yung mga values na pwede i-plug in sa dito sa tatlong components. Is that clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Parang isa na lang yung nakikinig. Asa na yung iba? So in order to graph a vector function, all we do is to think of the vector returned by the vector function as a position vector for points on the graph. So you have a position vector V, A, B, C. It's a vector that starts at the origin and ends at this point. You remember that, no? As your position vector. So in order to sketch the graph of a vector function, all we need to do is plug in some values of t and then plot the points that corresponds to the resulting position vector that we get out of the vector function. So let us just try to visualize natin. You're asked to sketch the graph of each of the following vector functions. R of t equals a t1, component t1. Another one is R of t equals t cubed minus 10t plus 7. For the solution, so the first thing that we need to do is to plug in a few values of t and get some position vectors. So R at negative 3, you will have negative 3, 1 at t man. O anong t mo? 1 pa rin. R at negative 1, Still have that 1. I have 2. Basta, constant kasi yung 1 doon sa second component. Constant daw siya. So what this tells us is that the following points are all on the graph of this vector function. Nakita na ninyo ito before. Ito yung itsura. Ito yung diniscuss natin. Diba? So that's how it looks like. R of t equals t cubed minus 10t plus 7. So the couple evaluations for this vector function, we will have t. So when negative 3, you will have negative 3. Tapos, 3 cubed minus 10. So 3 cubed is 9. Minus 10 times 3. Okay, minus 30. Then plus 7. So you have there 10. And down the line, you can substitute this one for a couple of evaluations. So we've got a few points on the graph of this function. However, unlike the first part, this isn't really going to be enough points to get a good idea of this graph. So you can take quite a few function evaluation to get an idea of what the graph is, and since it's usually easier to use a computer to do the graphing. So you come up with the following. Medyo mas complicated kasi ang graph nito. This is how it looks like. Okay. So computer generated na to. So both of the vector function, the above example, were in this form. So, and what we were already sketching is the graph this. Y is equal to g of x. Kunyari, ito naman, 6 cosine t, 3 sine t. So, ganun pa rin ang gagawin, no? You have to consider, as we saw in the last part, you can really take quite a few functions evaluation. So, few sketches are this. This one. Meron na rin to. I showed this sketch before. So, it looks like we got an ellipse. And that one. And this is the other one. Yeah. Sketch of this vector function is this one. Medyo ano na to, no? Complicated yung sketch. Pero, i-trace out lang kasi pa rin. So, you are familiar with parametric equations. So, again, the fact that we got an ellipse here should come as a surprise. No? You have x equal to 6 cosine t and y is equal to 3 sine t. Familiar na kayo dyan. Tapos ito, you can rewrite r of t to be your f of t, g of t. So, component by component, where x is your f of t and y is equal to g of t. So, can be broken down into this parametric equation. Likewise, ang three-dimensional ninyo na r of t, f of t, g of t, h of t can be broken down as ang x ninyo is your f of t, y is your g of t, and z is equal to h of t. So we're just going through some facts here so that you can write down some equations later on. So, example, you're asked to sketch a graph of the following vector function. R of t is equal to 2 minus 4t, negative 1 plus 5t, then you have comma 3 plus t. So, one lang man ang exponent. So, pag one exponent, then, this is nothing more than a line. Line lang siya. R of t, you have 2 minus 1. Then you have your 3 here. Plus, you have dalawang vectors. Come up with negative 4t. This is 5t. So, 5t, then you have your 3 times 1. So, from here, you can write it as such. So, in this form, you can see that this is the equation of the line that goes through kanina point and is parallel to this vector. So, ma-recognize nyo na to. This is a equation of a line that goes through this point and parallel to this. So, equation of a line. So, this one, graph the following vector function. X is equal to 2 cosine t, y is equal to 2 sine t, and z is equal to 3. So this one, the parametric equation for x and y give a circle of radius 2 centered on the origin about the z-axis. So what can we derive from this? All the parametric equations here tell us that no matter what is going on in the graph, all the z-coordinates must be 3. So we actually have a circle of radius 2 centered on the z-axis and at the level of z equals. Constant man siya palagi ito, 3 constant. Constant man yung lumabas dyan. So, level 3, you have it. Ito. This is your sketch. At level 3, you actually have a circle. You can modify the above vector function to get a circle centered on the x or y axis. You can have it. So 10 sine t, then minus 3, ang y niya is minus 3, na? 10 cosine t. It will be a circle of radius 10 centered on the y axis and at y equals negative 3. So meaning to say, as long as two of the terms are sine and cosine with the same coefficient, and the other is a fixed number, then we'll have a circle that is centered on the axis that is given by the fixed number. So this modification would look like this. Grass to kami. 4 sine t, tapos t dito. Nag-vary na po dito in terms of t, no? So this one had a constant in the z component, we would have another circle. However, wala man good siya nag-constant. T man siya. We don't have a constant. So we got a t. That will change the curve. However, because the x and y component function are still circle, this one are circle, in parametric equations, our curve should have a circular nature to it in some way. Ano itsura kaya niyan? Let's see. Ito siya. Actually, we have a helix or spiral depending on you want to call it. So, sometimes you call it helix, sometimes you just simply call it a spiral. So, yun yung graph ng curve. May mga iba pang example. Ito, this one, you can take a look at that one later on. How about this? Determine the vector equation for the line segment starting at the point, this. Example 7. So we need a point on the line. We've got 2 and we will use your P. We need a vector that is parallel to the line. And since we've got 2 points, you can make a vector out of them. Then this vector will lie on the line and hence to be parallel on the line. So we want to preserve the starting and ending point of the line segment. So we can construct the following using the same orientation. Using the point P and that one. So you have a point P on the line, then a T, and then this vector here. So you can rewrite it exactly as such. Pwede ma-distribute mo ang T and that one. So you come up with this one. Dapat alam niyo na mag-manipulate nito, ha? Algebra part yung manipulation niyan. So at r equal to 0, you will have the following. x1, y1, z1. At r1 is you have this. So the vector equation, the line segment, this one, that starts at this and ends at this is, where t should be less than or equal to. Malapit na matapos ang first part. Another solution would, another example would be to identify this described by, the surface described by this. So this one I leave to you. 7. Can go through this one. Okay. Hyperbolic paraboloid. The reference for this are my old lecture notes, as well as you can, again, what can you do? You can take a look at the YouTube channel, Teacher Kathy and Being CIM. And this one, I actually wrote the one who has this account and asked for permission na pwede ko siyang i-share sa inyo. Okay, and he agreed. That's why I'm using this as also one of my references. Okay? So let me just, hello, are you still with me? Discard na lang natin ang natin.
Yes, ma'am. Na kami.
Yes, ma'am.
Naintindi ba?
Um,
Medyo mahaba yung slides na yon. Tapos hindi ko na inano para minimal yung pagsulat ko kasi nga umiikot-ikot itong ating pen pag when I use this. So that's why I made it the point na puro ano na lang, konti, minimal na lang ang pero may mga ginawa pa rin akong yung dati na mga PowerPoint presentation na kailangan talagang sulatan. Okay? So let me just end this one. Stop recording so that we can go to the next part.